For those that know me, my name is Amy Wolf. I'm the programming coordinator for the Osterville Village Library. Thank you so much for being here today on this drizzly Saturday. And to our friends on Zoom, thank you so much for joining us as well. Today we have with us Glenn Davis, the president of the Friends of the Mashpee National Wildlife Refuge, to talk about one of Cape Cod's favorite birds, one of their favorite birds, the osprey, and more specifically, Rachel and Carson. The osprey, it's okay. The osprey in the nest on the webcam, which we always show downstairs. The Mashpee National Wildlife Refuge is unique here on Cape Cod. It encompasses more than 5,800 acres and is the second largest accessible open space on the Cape, the first being the National Seashore. The Friends of the Mashpee National Wildlife Refuge exists to ensure the long-term protection and enhancement of native wildlife and habitats, to support the Mashpee National Wildlife Refuge partners' management efforts, and to promote advocacy, education, conservation, and recreational opportunities within the Mashpee Refuge. They support native pollinators through education, sponsoring workshops, and creating pollinator gardens in the Mashpee Refuge and with other conservation partners. So without further ado, here is Glenn Davis.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for coming on this dreary day. The live feed over there, it looks like it might be clearing up a little bit because this morning we had a lot of raindrops on the lens, which tends to happen on rainy days. Right now there's a few spots, but it's mostly clear and we can see pretty well. So, as Amy said, I'm going to talk today about ospreys, Cape Cod's iconic species. Before I get too much into ospreys, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Mashpee National Wildlife Refuge, the Friends Group. The osprey nest, the camera is, we like to say it's brought to you by us, but it was a partnership between the Friends of the Mashpee National Wildlife Refuge, the Wacoit Bay National Estuarine Research Reserve, which tend to refer to as either the Wacoit Bay Reserve or just simply Webner. It's much easier to say. And also cut off on the bottom of the screen, it also says Comcast. They were one of our partners in this. They actually funded the camera, did all the installation. So they're very indebted to Comcast for this project. The Mashpee Refuge and the Friends Group were both established in 1995. Our purpose as the Friends is to assist the partners. I'll talk a little bit about the partnership in a minute. But we are stewards of the land. We do education programs, like Amy says. We do a lot of work with native pollinators, trail work, advocacy, educational programs. The Mashpee Refuge itself is over 5,800 acres in the towns of Falmouth and Mashpee. The refuge was named not after the town of Mashpee. People to this day make that assumption. It was actually named after the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe. The tribe is one of our partners. And we are very unique in the National Wildlife Refuge System, which has, I forget the current number, somewhere, I think, over 500 refuges nationwide. But we are, I believe, the only one that is managed by a cooperative group of 9 partners. Here they are, the 9 partners. Right in the middle, the Friends Group, we are one of the partners. The towns of Mashpee and Falmouth, the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe, Massachusetts Division of Fisheries and Wildlife, the Wacoit Bay Reserve, it's Webner. We use that term, so that's what we mean when we say that. U.S. Fish and Wildlife, Falmouth Rod and Gun Club, Orenda Land Trust, and like I said, all that. We are focused on wildlife, not only ospreys, but also pollinators, monarch butterflies, bees, beetles, all mammals, all of the wildlife that lives in or around the refuge. We're there to support them and help them. We get involved in many different projects. Up in the top left, of course, is the building of a osprey nest platform. If you can see close enough to look at the three people, but if you look at those three faces, you might be able to guess when that construction project was done. We're all wearing face masks and we're outdoors. So that was actually, I believe it was very beginning of March in 2020. Yes, 2020. That nest, which was, I think, the last nest that we actually built. We've since done some repair work on certain other platforms. But we put that nest up and within 2 weeks, it was occupied by a nesting family. And so, yes, ospreys are very common in the area. You can't walk around, look up in the sky, it seems, especially if you're near water without seeing an osprey these days. They've made an incredible comeback in recent years. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. We do a lot of pollinator work. Some of these pictures are planting work with the tribe. There's a group of AmeriCorps kids that we were working with up in the top right. That's at Webner. That was actually a Girl Scout troop in Ohio that we had sponsored and arranged some programming, and they were doing some netting in McCoy Bay. And we also we planted and also maintain several pollinator gardens at the refuge and at several of their trailheads. I'm going to talk mostly about ospreys and mostly about this osprey nest, which is at the McCoy Bay Reserve. The camera was installed in 2022, spring 2022. So this is our third season with the camera on the nest. The nesting pair, we have dubbed Rachel and Carson. If you know the name Rachel Carson, I'll talk a little bit about her in a minute. That's Rachel coming in for a landing. We can tell it's Rachel because we can tell it's Rachel because she has kind of a mottled brown spotted area on her chest. And that's usually how you can tell a male from a female. It's referred to as sometimes as a bib or a necklace. It's not a sure way of telling a male from a female, but it is the really the best, really the only way that we can tell by looking at that. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Some facts about ospreys, and what I plan to do today is to review a little bit about ospreys, their some of their characteristics that makes them so unique. Talk about some of their behavioral habits, nesting habits, but I'm also going to focus much of my time today on looking at highlights from the nest camera, and we can talk about that. I'll also say that I don't mind taking questions. I'll have a period at the end where focus mostly on questions then, but I don't mind being interrupted. So if anyone has any questions at any point during the talk, feel free to raise your hand or just shout out a question. That's fine with me. Ospreys are found on every continent in the world except for Antarctica. Not all ospreys are migratory. The ones here on Cape Cod do migrate. They spend the season, the spring, summer, a little bit of the fall here on Cape Cod, and then they spend the rest of the year down in Central or South America. They typically live between 15 and 20 years. Oh, and I should also mention the migratory species of ospreys, which are the ones we see here on Cape Cod, breed only in the spring and summer while they're here. So in the winter, when they're down in Brazil or wherever they may go to, they're just enjoying the nice weather. They're not breeding down there. And they're also not together with their mates. I'll talk a little bit about that too. They typically live 15 to 20 years. The nesting pair on the nest here, we don't know how old they are. We've only had the camera since 2022. If we had the camera here for 20 years, we might have been able to tell when a new pair moved in. But for now, and one thing I should mention, if you see anything really interesting in that camera view over there, like, for example, if one of those eggs happens to hatch, please let me know. Just shout it out and we're all kind of cheerful. As I said, the female has the mottled brown necklace. They're also typically larger than that. When you see a pair of ospreys side by side, the female, sometimes the male will have the necklace. The females will always be a little more prominent. So when you see a pair, you can almost always tell which is the male, which is the female. The females are also large. Kind of hard to tell when you're only looking at one, but if they're side by side and you don't get into a one's in the foreground, one's in the background, that can throw things off a little bit. But larger one would be the female. They do, ospreys typically do remain together for life. And they return to their previous nest and they add to the nest. So that nest will keep getting taller and taller until winter storms might blow it away and then they start over. They also, their diet is predominantly fish. 99% of their diet is fish. They are very well adapted to catching fish. I need to actually switch to. Oops. What happened? That didn't. Bear with me 1 second. Sure, I'm still sharing. Still sharing. Okay. I did have a video that I was kind of hoping to show, but didn't quite work. But if you've never seen an osprey hunting and diving for a fish, Google it and you will find videos, and it is amazing to watch. They will typically kind of hover over a body of water. They've got incredible eyesight. They will just sort of drop down and go completely underwater. And one thing that's a little bit different about ospreys, they catch fish with their talons. And when they dive down, just before they hit the water, their talons and their legs are down this way. Just before they hit the water, they raise them up like this. So they're actually hitting the water talons first. And if there's a fish in there, they're going to catch it. And if there's they know there's a fish because they've spotted it and they're watching it. Their success rate is usually 1 out of every maybe 3 or 4 attempts, they will catch a fish. They do migrate, as I said, the birds that we see here on Cape Cod, they take a route, either through, they might go down the coast of Florida or might go down, Central America. Usually they wind up in South America. There are non-migratory, species of ospreys. If you happen to spend any time in Florida and you see an osprey there, those are usually not migratory birds. They're usually there year-round. Unless they're just kind of en route. But usually the ones that are nesting in Florida would be there year-round. Rachel Carson, I mentioned her. So we named our pair after her, very fitting name. In the 1950s and 60s, the osprey population was nearly eliminated as a result, mainly of DDT use. Rachel Carson published a book. She was a marine biologist, environmentalist, a conservationist. She published a book in 1962 called Silent Spring, where she warned about the harm that these pesticides were causing in ospreys and other wildlife, other birds, bald eagles, many other birds, and then not just birds, but mammals. And really all the way up and down the food chain through there. In 1972, full decade after the book was published, DDT was banned. And the osprey populations began to come back. We think on Cape Cod and around that time, probably in the early 1970s, they believe there were maybe a dozen, maybe a couple of dozen pairs of ospreys on Cape Cod. There are now hundreds of pairs thriving on Cape Cod, which is why when you're near the water and you look up, you're gonna see one. Rachel Carson did spend part of her career in Woods Hole, and she does have a Cape Cod connection. I should also mention, so when DDT was banned in 1972, Rachel Carson had died. She died in, I could be wrong about the year, but I think it was maybe 60, mid-60s. After the book was published, it might have been 63 or 64. So she did not live to see this comeback of the ospreys. Been very happy to see that, obviously, and we like to think that we've memorialized her a little bit by naming our birds after her. On Cape Cod, all ospreys, so this is specifically about Cape Cod and migratory ospreys. They return mid to late March. They are a harbinger of spring. Many people will say that they come back on St. Patty's Day. And actually this year, they did return on St. Patty's Day, March 17th. Eggs are usually about a month later. Eggs are laid in mid-April. Typically between 2 and 4 eggs in a clutch. They're laid 2 to 3 days apart, and they hatch. They will incubate for 37 to maybe 39, 40 days. And they will hatch in the order that they are laid. So if there are, let's say, 4 eggs and they're 2 to 3 days apart, they're going to be over a week apart, and they'll hatch over a week or 10 days apart. That is beneficial to the older siblings, not so beneficial to the young ones. It's clearly a survival of the fittest scenario. Typically, the older ones will be the first to get food. Sometimes they're tolerant of the younger siblings, sometimes they're not, and it can get kind of nasty sometimes. Some of the sibling rivalries that we see. After about 2 months, when the chicks are about 2 months old, they will learn to fly and fledge. They'll still, they don't leave the nest permanently until they leave for the season. And even once the chicks fledge, fledglings at that point, they will keep coming back to the nest, and they are still heavily dependent on the parents for food. It's really the very end part of the season that they can become fully self-sufficient, and in terms of learning to hunt, to fish for themselves, and provide for themselves. And it's mid to late September when they start to migrate. They don't migrate together. Usually the female, the mother, will be first, followed by the male. The dad will stay around, provide for the kids. Doesn't really teach them to fish, but some of it may be innate, or they're mimicking the adult male's behavior. They will learn it on their own. And typically it's the youngest juveniles that leave the nest last. They all make that journey. Think about that map I showed you, that 3,000-mile journey from Cape Cod to Brazil, or wherever they're going to end up. They do that alone. The pair, the male and female pair, do not fly together. They don't even meet up together in South America. They're totally on their own, and the juveniles are totally on their own. They fly down there. How they do it is one of these great mysteries of nature. But somehow they know where to go, and they even know how to get back. So a little bit about the camera on the nest. It was installed by Comcast in March of 2022. It was a pretty major undertaking. Just give you a little background of how this came to be. Sometime during that winter, or it might have even been the previous fall, I was watching a streaming nest cam on a bald eagle nest down in West Virginia, and started thinking this would be a great thing for us to do with Ospreys. So I contacted that group, who pointed me in the direction of another group, a organization, a company out in California called HDL TAP, which actually hosts our live video. And they made some suggestions to me, and I started just thinking about where we could get funding and how we can make this happen. And on a whim, I decided to, I think I emailed, I looked up Comcast and tried to find some corporate emails, and just emailed some random person in the corporate office of Comcast in Boston. And sure enough, a couple of days later, I heard from someone, said, yeah, we're interested, we'll do this for you. Which was like amazing news. You could have knocked me over with a feather. It still took about really throughout that fall and winter and early spring to figure out what nest to put this on. We were looking at, this wasn't actually the first nest we were considering. There were a few others we were looking at. Once we got approval from Webner, the White Bay Reserve, Comcast was ready to go. This was early March in 2022. We had a little bit of a deadline because, as I said, the Ospreys come back middle of March. Once the Ospreys were back, we can't be up in the nest, installing a camera. So Comcast, I don't know if you can quite tell, yeah, down in the corner here, you see a little snow on the side of the road there. The ground was still frozen and they couldn't dig. They were gonna put the cables in from the building that's a little bit hidden behind a tree, but all kind of in the middle of the screen on the right, on the live cam. There's a building there, a classroom laboratory building, part of Webner. And that's where the equipment was, and they had to run a wire that was supposed to be underground. But when it came time to install that, the ground was frozen, they couldn't do it, so they kind of scrambled and ran some cables overhead. Which the second year they actually did have them come back and put it underground where it was supposed to be. But it was a pretty major undertaking. It was great fun to watch them up there and stringing wires and putting a camera up there, knowing it was all for the purpose of getting this camera up and running.
Glenn?
Yeah.
Back on that other slide, when Comcast did the installation, I've noticed from watching other Osprey nests that they have a feature where you can actually go back 12 hours and go forward. Have you seen that on other live cams?
We do not, yes.
Are we gonna
I
get
know,
that
I know
eventually?
exactly what you mean.
Okay.
Where the user, the viewer can kind of go
Correct.
backwards, yes.
Yes.
We do record everything, so we have recordings. They're in 15-minute segments of the camera views. And I can always go back and retrieve things, but this hosting provider that we're using does not have that feature.
Any shot of ever getting that upgraded?
Never say never, so it could happen. It's not, I've asked that question, I've made that request.
Okay.
It's not part of their platform. We probably have to switch hosting providers to do that, which
Okay.
maybe at some point, that will happen. But yeah, I agree. There are also some Nest users can not only go backwards and can't go forward, you can go backwards.
Yeah.
But some also have a feature where you can control the camera and zoom in
I've seen
and
that, yes.
which is really cool. I wish we had that. And maybe someday we will. We'll work on it. I should ask, I don't know how many of you watch the Nest religiously, like some people do. Okay, good. And I hope some of you are what I'd like to say are most loyal viewers and the people that are often commenting on the site. If you are, please introduce yourself to me afterwards, because I know a lot of the names, the first names of the people that are on the site and are commenting, but I've never connected with the faces. Yeah, questions?
So, the first question is, do the males, so does the female sit on the eggs?
They will switch.
Okay.
It is predominantly, it is the female. If you see a bird sitting on the nest, 9 out of 10 times, it's going to be the female. But once in a while, the male will relieve her, or she'll just kind of go off and stretch her wings. Usually the male will provide for her in terms of fish. Will bring fish back to the nest, and the female will eat it right there. But they will switch, so they share that responsibility to some extent.
I have one, or I don't know if it's the same one that hangs out in my backyard for hours and days at a time, and I just wonder whether he or she is like any little negligent in their responsibilities, but.
Well, people have, a lot of the people that comment on the site, we sometimes won't see Carson for, it seems like almost, hours or, even like an entire day. Maybe he'll just kind of come in, drop off the fish, leave. Where he goes, we don't really know. People have referred to him as a deadbeat dad. Which, I don't think it's really that. It's part of their, just kind of what they do. They do their job, they provide for the family, but they're not there the entire time. Yeah.
Can you address a threesome? We have a threesome in our nest in our back feet. Not sure which is the dad, which is the mom, and just tries to make it into a threesome.
It's probably not a reason.
I'm watching that.
Yeah. Possibly, I should note that, I'm not an ornithologist, so, whether that's could be a real thing, I honestly don't know. We have had times on the nest, and I'll actually show some of the highlight clips about this. We do have, we've had other visitors to the nest. Other birds, other ospreys will land on the nest. Clearly it's not Carson. There is another nest about, it's probably less than 100, I was gonna say 100 miles, less than 100 yards away, on one of the buildings at the Point Bay Reserve on the visitor center. We call that the chimney nest. We suspect, we have no way of really verifying this, but we suspect that there may be some relationship between those birds. They could be siblings from a previous season that are nesting there, and they seem to be a little more tolerant than they might otherwise be to a real intruder. So sometimes there is that level of cooperation. So anyways, Earth Osprey came to the nest this year on March 17th. We assumed that was Carson. The males are typically the first to arrive. They start doing some housekeeping on the nest. The female might arrive a week or so later. As it turned out, we were wrong. Some people first got a good look at the bird, and he did have a necklace. So we're thinking, okay, maybe it's Rachel. Then we saw two birds on the nest, and they both had the necklace. A little strange. I actually consulted with some experts, and so, asking, is it possible that the markings would change from year to year? And he said, no, absolutely not. That doesn't happen. So it turned out that they were, next slide. There was a male and a female, probably Rachel, and another male who did have the chest markings. And there was a lot of, much careful here. Oops, that didn't work. Hold on. No. Okay. When I get to my video clips, I'm gonna replay this. There was some fierce fighting over that nest. And when I mentioned before that ospreys mate for life, return to the nest, the same pair. One thing I've learned recently is that they're not returning to each other. They're returning to the nest. And they don't, and maybe it's the female isn't so concerned about whether this was her mate from last year or previous year. Or not previous year, but just some other, male, who knows what happened to last year's mate. But they are both returned to the nest. So Rachel was here for, the first male was here for, I think it was almost 2 weeks, and then Rachel was there. There was actually some mating behavior going on. And then the real Carson returned, and that's what I'm going to show you in a few minutes. So if I forget, make sure I come back to this. There were 4 eggs that I think that's Rachel over on the screen there that she's sitting on. Actually, in the picture here, that looks like it's Carson nest, because he's
Yeah.
got kind of a white chest. But it's a good view of 4 eggs. They were laid between April 11th through the 19th. So we've got an 8-day span, so these eggs will hatch probably about somewhere between maybe 6 and 8 days apart. So again, the older siblings are gonna be a full week older, if not a day or two more than the younger ones, and that can be problematic for the younger ones. The first egg, if you do the math from April 11th, should hatch sometime around May 11th. Who knows today's date? May 18th, did I say 11th? May 18th. Today is May 18th, so watch carefully. We may see, that would be amazing if you witness this live. I was saying to Amy earlier, if I were a chick inside a nice warm egg, on a day like this where it's rainy and kind of cold, I'd probably wait another day before I get there. So no guarantee that it's gonna come out. That's why there is kind of even this 37 to 39 days, it's probably more 37 to 41 or 42 days. Is the incubation period. The chicks grow fast. The next few pictures, I'll go through these kind of quickly. This is from 2023, from last year. These are the chicks right here. They're kind of small. They weigh maybe 2 or 3 ounces. Just a few days old. After that's about 2 weeks old. What's to say there?
Where are they in that picture? Yeah.
These are you can see the very young nestlings have kind of almost a racing stripe down their back. So kind of look for that stripe, and that's the bird. I should mention at this point, so this was last year. Last year, there were 4 eggs. All 4 of them hatched. 2 of them did not make it in the very, kind of the last week in May, first week in June. There was some very cold and very rainy, wet, terrible conditions, just raw. You know these days if you live in the area. But only 2 of them survived. So it's all kind of a numbers game. They lay, 3 or 4 eggs. They don't necessarily all hatch, but if they do all hatch, it's not a given that they're all going to survive. So that's why in this picture, which is June 10th, there's only 2 chicks there. This is about, those are about a month old. They're growing pretty fast. This is about 2 months old. And at this point, they still have the coloration of a juvenile, but they are almost full grown. So if you see them kind of side by side with either one of the adults, a little bit smaller, but there isn't that huge difference between them in size. And the juveniles always have this kind of white white fringe around the tips of their wings.
Are they fledglings by that point?
At this point, they are still July 21st. They have not fledged yet, so they would still be called nestlings.
Happens to the ones that don't make it, do they throw them out of a nest? Or-
Yeah, we actually had it on video, and it was just, come morning, they were clearly not moving, and Carson had removed them, just pick them up with his beak and drop them somewhere, we don't really know where. All right, so now what I'm going to do. Maybe I can get this to work. Wait, sure, let's share my screen. Oops. Oops. I share screen thing like that. All right, let's see. I'm gonna jump around a little bit. I was gonna start with season one, but since I missed this, these territorial battles, let's see. All right, so this again, this was the first two ospreys that appeared on the nest. The first one was not Carson. Thought it was at the time, but clearly it wasn't. This happens pretty quickly,
Yeah,
and I'm gonna stop it at some point if I can. Actually, you know what? I'm gonna go to a different one. This was March 29th of this year. So this is the male that's facing us to the right. And. Oops. Did you see that?
I know.
If you blinked, you missed it.
Yeah.
This,
Somebody posted a picture of that.
yeah.
It was a good snapshot too. There it is.
See that, John?
Oh. Yeah.
The bird in the nest is doing practically a somersault. He is doing a 360. The reason why, why do you think he's doing that? Not showing off. He's defending the nest. There's another osprey that's kind of out of view here that's coming down towards him. He's flipping over to go talons up.
Yeah.
Because its talons are its only line of defense. They don't defend themselves by, biting or with their beaks. Their talons are razor sharp. That's how they catch fish, and they also use those talons to defend themselves. So, I'm gonna let this go. This happens really quickly. And it happens a few times. It keeps happening. The bird comes back. He does this somersault. The bird, which come to find out, knocks him over, knocks him out, almost clearly out of the nest. This happened over and over and over again over a 2 or 3 day period. And eventually, the victor was Carson. Show you that picture. So again, it's just. He's doing everything he can, and there he kind of, got knocked off the nest. He swooped down, Rachel is just watching this activity. She's not really participating too much, to some extent. Not sure she really cares that much who wins the battle, just, the stronger one. I want the stronger one as my mate. That's basically what she is thinking.
Do you know how old Rachel and Carson are? Do you have any idea?
We don't. As I said, they will typically live between in the wild 15 to 20 years. But we have no way of telling how old this pair is.
Yeah, in that course of the 15 to 20 years, how often does the female lay eggs? Is it a
Oh,
good portion
every
of
year,
that?
every
Okay,
year,
wow.
yeah. So, okay. This is Carson. This is some mating behavior going on here, but what I wanted to call your attention to is this was a day or two after those battles. And look on his chest. He's got a little battle wound. And that healed within a few days. That was no longer visible. Yeah, he was, he has his battle scars there. And at this point, Rachel is happy to have the real Carson back. And he was there to stay. Those other birds did not come back after this few day period. Osprey nests, there are more ospreys than places for them to nest. They are subject to obviously human infringement. The shorelines used to be lined with trees and now they're lined with houses. And, as you do see many of these types of platforms that that this nest is sitting on. Ospreys also like to nest on utility poles. That's not necessarily a good thing, but it's an attractive, it seems to them at the time to be an attractive place to build a nest. That can be problematic for the power companies and can be very problematic and hazardous for the birds. There is an organization based in Falmouth called the Falmouth Osprey Project that works with Eversource and utility companies to relocate nests that are on their power lines, on their power poles, utility poles. Yeah.
Why don't they ever build a nest in a tree? Why?
They do.
They do.
And naturally, they would build nests in trees.
Yeah.
That's right.
I'm kind of-
Predominantly, you don't see them that often, but they are around.
Okay.
Predominantly, it would be maybe a dead tree that has a couple of, branches, like, fork-shaped branches without a lot of leaves, but just, something that they've got good visibility. They like to be able to see. They're predators, but to see the water and a view of the water. And a nice dead tree is perfect.
Yeah.
Well, if there's a dead tree in somebody's yard, they're gonna cut it down. There is a lot of competition for the nesting platforms, which is why we see this type of behavior where the intruders come in and say, I'd like this nest. In this case, a bird got to the nest before Carson, another osprey got to the nest before Carson did. That bird was thinking, I got here first, this is mine, and Carson came back, and it was about 10 days later, and said, I might be late, but this nest is mine. You're not getting it that easy, and he indeed won out. What will happen next year? Again, we don't know how old Carson is. But he's not getting any younger, and if there's a younger, stronger bird, that might win that battle next year. that very much could happen. We did have a couple of, let's say it was a learning experience, some mishaps, in the first couple of years, and if you've watched. You saw the caption on that. If you've been watching this, so this was one of the chicks in 2022. And watch what happens here. It's called this ready, aim, fire. That happened at least 3 times. We are convinced they were aiming for the lens, and even look at Rachel here. She's looking up at the lens, saying, "Good shot, Junior."
Yeah.
But it happened 3 times after and each time it would rain and it would get a little bit better, but it never really cleared completely. And people had all these crazy ideas of, well, can't you have the fire department come up and clean it off with their fire hose. And I actually did call the Falmouth Fire Department to ask them if they could do that, and they said, no, we don't really do that, sorry. And we talked to some other groups, and ospreys are protected birds. You really can't go up and disturb a nest, especially when there are eggs, or this book there were nestlings, so it wasn't quite, it was a matter of climbing up a pole that's 40 feet high, I should mention, and trying to clear it off. So we did our best with what we had to work with. And then here too, we did have Comcast come back and move the camera. So this year, actually last year, we moved it up about, I think it's another 2 feet up and maybe 2 feet back. So the view is a little bit smaller than it was in the first year, but it's remained clear. So it'll stay that way. We did have another mishap. Last year. This was the very beginning of last year. Carson came back. We're pretty sure this is Carson. Cold, rainy night. Watch carefully here. Windy day. There went not just the nest, but the entire structure of the wood pallet that was on was gone. And we scrambled to try to figure out, what are we going to do now? We thought, this is it. This is the end of our season. But it wasn't. Within hours, by the next morning, I think it happened, April Fool's Day, yeah, look at that. It was right around noon. By 8 o'clock the next morning. It was repaired. And this is about 5 minutes long. I don't have to show all of it necessarily. Here it is again. There goes the platform. So that was about 12:30 in the afternoon. The next day, April 2nd, just before 8 o'clock in the morning, we had here comes the truck. We connected with several groups. We were literally scrambling, trying to figure out what to do about this. We connected with the Falmouth Osprey project, which I mentioned, and they partner with Moriarty Tree Service. That's Mick Moriarty, who went up there with his bucket truck. The Osprey project had available a platform, that platform that you see here, ready to go. They said, you can have it. Their only stipulation, and we'll see this in a minute, was they kind of burned their, or I don't know if it was wood burned or if it was in Sharpie or something like that. But they put the Falmouth Osprey project on one of the boards, which was visible to the camera. So they said, you know, can we do that? And we're like, please, whatever you want, just give us a new platform. That platform probably weighs about 50 pounds.
Oh, wow.
You can see him kind of struggling.
Yeah.
It's shaking, not only because of the weight of the platform, but the winds were blowing at about 30 miles an hour. It was not the most, the best conditions to do this, but we were determined to get it done quickly. Nick was great. He hoisted it in place. At this point, he has to, you know, he's facing the wrong way. He's got to flip it around. He's trying to maneuver this thing without falling out of his bucket.
Yeah.
He did an amazing job. There it is on the far board. You can kind of see where a scratch etched into it. It says the Osprey project. Once the nest was built, once the sticks were up there, you can't see them again. But we know it's there. We also retrieved much of the material from the old nest. He hoisted it back up there with the blanket and dumped it in and said, okay, birds, you're on your own.
Yeah.
And within, but he was barely down on the ground when the birds came back. They walked around and said, yeah, this is all good.
Did the chicks survive?
There were no chicks and no eggs. in that. This was April, the very beginning of April last year, so there weren't even any eggs. Yeah, if there were eggs, they would have been gone. If there were chicks, there's nobody, they would survive that. Yeah.
Do they secure the platform or is it just sitting?
Yeah, I skipped over that part, but yes, it is bolted down. Yeah. It's not just balanced, you know, waiting for the next wind. Oops, this is us. Wrong is.
Are the birds tagged?
No, they're not. They do tag ospreys, but these birds have never been tagged. That would be a good thing. I mean, especially for the young, for the juveniles, it would be great to be able to tag them. But the Wucoy Bay Reserve does not have a program where they tag birds. So, yeah, maybe at some point in the future, it would be great to be able to know when they return. Some birds are tagged just with a number for identification purposes. Some actually have transmitters, where they can, and that's, that map I showed earlier where, the route down the coast and down to South America. They do that based on radio transmitter. And personally, I'd love to know exactly where they go and when they're coming back. Wouldn't that be great if we could watch them? Chicks, when they're born, they're pretty tiny. They're easier to see in a video than a still picture because they're moving. They weigh 2 to maybe 3 ounces when they're born, and they're fed immediately from day one. Carson will be off. He'll be fishing. He'll catch a fish, bring it back to the nest, and he and Rachel will kind of either alternating or sometimes one or the other, just breaking off bits of fish and feeding it to the young.
So speaking of the young, where do they, so you'd say the pair tend to return to the same location, where, do you have any ideas where the young return to? Are they on their own to find a new spot?
Good question. Hang on 1 second. Amy?
Yep.
Screen sharing is paused. Share. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, I'm sorry, what was the question?
About the young, where, like, where
Oh,
do they
okay,
return to?
okay. The juveniles, when they leave, they make that trek down to, down south. They do not come back the next year. They will spend the winter there and spend the entire next year there and return the following year. So when they come back, they are, what does that make them? 18 months old, something like that. So, but that doesn't explain how they found their way back and how, and exactly where they go. They will usually come back to the same general area. They're not gonna, it's probably unlikely that it's one of, Rachel and Carson's, offspring that are fighting to reclaim or to claim that nest for themselves. But if, let's say, Rachel or Carson don't make it back 1 year, a lot of things can happen to an osprey in the off season. Sometimes they don't make it back. So one of the young could be the ones fortunate enough to take over that nest, or they will build a nest somewhere else. If there isn't one available on a platform, someone asked about, nesting in a tree, they'll find a tree and they'll, build a nest in a tree. If anyone here is a boat owner, and has had an experience, or has a dock even, and has had an experience, with ospreys trying to build a nest on a boat or on a dock. Those are often what they sometimes call practice nests. They're juveniles, that may have returned, that don't have a nest of their own. And they're just sort of going through the motions of, they don't really fully expect that nest to be their, in an attractive enough place to attract a female, this is the male building the nest. So they do the best they can until they find a more suitable permanent location for them to build themselves. Season, let's see. Carson brings the fish back. There's.
No.
Carson brings the fish back. His job is over. Sometimes he brings half the fish back. In this case, did you see that? That fish was jumping around the nest. They're not necessarily dead when he brings them back. Yeah, eventually they'll hold it down and they'll, jump off enough of it, so, to make sure it's not gonna do any harm. Sometimes, watch carefully on this one. So there's the two chicks. There's the fish. That fish is still alive. Did you see that? The fish was knocked over backwards, did a little bit of a somersault. There he goes. Flopped his tail and that little baby osprey didn't really know what hit him at first, but he sits there for a minute and then he does work his way back. So they always do it. I didn't mention, but so the adult pair we call Rachel and Carson. The first year we had an online naming contest for the chicks. And there were a lot of good names, or no, I'm sorry, I take that back. We had an online naming contest for Rachel and Carson. We were going to do the same thing for the chicks. Someone had suggested, again, you can't tell the gender of a chick. So we don't know whether they're males or females. We needed gender neutral names. We ended up going with the NATO alphabet. So the first year we had Alpha and Bravo. No, I'm sorry, we had Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie. There were three. The first year, there were 4 eggs, only 3 of them hatched. So Charlie was the baby, the so-called runt of the litter. There was a lot of bullying of Charlie. Charlie was the underdog. There was a lot of rooting in the comments for Charlie. And he didn't make it till the end, and he fledged, and he was the last one to leave the nest in the fall. Last year, we had 4 chicks hatch. But sadly, only 2 of them survived, but they were Delta, Echo, Foxtrot, and Golf. And this year, our eggs, still has our egg hatched yet? Not yet, I don't think, possible. Our hatchlings will be Hotel and India. Oh, I'm sorry, we've got 4 eggs. Hotel, India, Juliet. And Kilo. Jay, okay, Kilo, thank you. Juliet and Kilo. The female does a lot in terms of not only protecting the eggs, keeping them warm, but protecting the chicks. On a cold day and a lot of cold days, and especially nights, she will do her best to keep them warm, keep them dry when it rains. They're out there out in the open, rainstorms, thunderstorms, this was middle of June last year. It's a little after 2. I'm gonna do a few minutes more. This was technically supposed to end at 2, but I'm happy to go as long as people want to stay. This is season 1 during a thunderstorm. You can see the chicks kind of hiding underneath Rachel. Sometimes in a rainstorm, you'll see her with her wings kind of spread like an umbrella. So that lightning strike. Well, why don't, I think what I will do is stop for a minute. If anyone has questions, this is a good time to ask. And I might switch back and forth to some of the, some of the video clips to answer any questions if they might be like. So any questions? Yeah.
Yeah, I was just wondering, what is the greatest distance from a body of water that an osprey would want to nest? Is it usually like a mile or so, or?
Probably, I'm not really sure. I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be a body of open water. They will fish on streams.
Do they show
Rivers
a
and
preference
streams.
of being closer to a saltwater body or freshwater or?
Either one. They are seen, you know, middle of the country in the Midwest on freshwater bodies.
Really? Okay, that's that.
Further questions, Mr. Price?
Are there any other birds of prey that could come down and attack the chicks or anything, or is that not in the hierarchy?
Biggest predator. Ospreys like, one of the reasons why the platforms are kind of up so high, and when they do nest in trees, they're usually high up in the trees, so they've got a good view down. One of the predators of the eggs are animals like raccoons. You know, if they're down low to the ground, yeah, they're raccoons, chipmunks per se, skunks, any type of mammal could go after those eggs or the chicks. But if they're up high, they've got time to react. And They can kind of see what's going on below them, and even when they leave the nest for a minute, and sometimes, we'll have a view of the nest and see, these little chicks there with neither one of the parents there. We're thinking, okay, they're leaving these chicks alone, they're not far. They're in a tree that's right nearby watching, or they're overhead, ready to just kind of swoop down. And it would be the very foolish squirrel that might say, oh, there's a little baby chick, I can handle that. Sometimes, I thought you were gonna ask this, sometimes we get this was October 22nd, the Ospreys had just left. And there comes a red-tailed hawk on the nest. And he's just kind of checking it out. Maybe there's some bits of food, fish that are left behind. But he just came in for a landing and enjoying the view from up there. We've had owls visit the nest, especially at night in the off season through the winter. We do keep the camera on through the winter. And we've seen some interesting things.
Grant?
Yeah.
Carson just did that with a fish.
Okay.
Carson.
So true. Sometimes it'll seem like they'll bring back a fish and it'll almost seem like this little tug of war going on. And it's really not, it's really more tearing the fish apart. So one will have its talons in one end of the fish and one will have its talons at the other. And it seems like they're, having to struggle over this. It's mine, no, it's mine. There was another osprey that just kind of flew overhead. When there are other ospreys around, they are on their guard and you can kind of see them hunker down, watching for a possible situation arise where they need to defend themselves. Oh, flying. I didn't really talk about this. So when the chicks learned to fly at about 2 months old, this was season 1.
Yeah.
But let me go to season 2. We'll see even better, but there's a lot of wing flapping, a lot of just little jumps. They'll flap their wings like crazy, trying to get off that nest, and they'll hop around a little bit, can't quite do it. Once in a while, they'll maybe hover about a foot or so over the nest, until eventually one of two things will happen. Either they'll get enough air so they can sort of take off, or they'll hover, and when they come back down for a landing, they'll miss the nest, and they're gonna learn to fly with that thing. We've had, I don't know if it was last year or the year before, someone saw that and said, oh my God, it fell off the nest. And we did have somebody kind of go out and look, and there was no osprey at the bottom of the nest, and he didn't return from the camera. So, yeah, they practice by just flapping their wings like crazy, trying to get off the ground. These two birds were probably, I think, maybe 3 days apart. So the older one fledged first, and the younger one was looking up in awe at what just happened, thinking, I want to do this too.
They obviously don't mind the weather conditions, the pouring rain or the sun beating down on them.
Well, they don't like it. Let's see.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks for coming. Yeah, if anyone does need to leave, feel free to go on. Stay here. But yeah, this was at night. It's raining pretty hard. They flap their wings, try to keep dry. When they're very young, Rachel will try to protect them with her wings. Same thing when it's sunny. Especially when the chicks are younger and they can't regulate their body temperatures. As lightning flash there. Rachel will just sort of shade them like a sun umbrella. It's almost like hail there bouncing off the nest.
And if Rachel were by herself, would she just hunker down against the storm, or do they always do that when it rains?
You see a little bit of both. They're not always doing this, especially at night. They're trying to sleep and they're just really just kind of hunkered down. Oh, I'm glad somebody brought this up. There was a PBS show on the show called Nature, Season of the Osprey. It's a great film. I think it was about an hour or so. I think it just came out this year. But very there's something that the Ospreys do in South America. What they do in South America is pretty much what they do here, except for breed. They catch fish. They're not going to be inland where there's no water. There's always some source of fish. Might be they might be on the Amazon or some great river, or maybe more likely it's a smaller tributary. Wasn't really a shark attack, but they bring back all kinds of fish, whatever they can find, in this case, mostly in Wacoit Bay. Or Nantucket or Vineyard Sound. I'm not a fisherman, so I can't always identify the fish, but we have seen fluke, flounder, scup. This thing was a small sand shark about this big.
Yeah.
Which
How far do they fly out to get on my dinner?
thank you. Sorry, what's the
How far do they fly out? Like what's their range for the streams
Well,
that
they're
they go? to get it?
generally not gonna go where the water is deep. They don't need to. They prefer shallow bottoms, where they can, look down and see right down to the bottom. They will sometimes dive down and be completely submerged, go even 3 or 4 feet below the surface and use their wings to push themselves back up. Not an easy thing to do.
Thank you for moderating our group and answering all the questions. It's really keeps everybody engaged.
Good, great.
It really does.
Glad you enjoyed it. Can I ask your name?
My name's Elaine, so I'm
Elaine.
on there as Ella C.
Okay,
I don't.
I
post
know
that
all
many
of the
things,
names, but
I've been watching it for years.
oh, great.
So
great.
interesting. So
Great.
thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.